This box smells amazing, and these are a great way to add some fragrance to your houseplant collection as well as some flavour to what you're doing in the kitchen. So these are scented geraniums, and I covered these in a previous video all about edible houseplants, but I couldn't actually find any of the plants for the video. So when I was in the garden centre this weekend, they had all of these wonderful varieties, so I had to buy them so I could do a follow-up video. Any excuse to buy new plants. But I bought the different varieties so that I could show you the wonderful fragrances and flavours that are out there. Try that again, fragrances and flavours, but also the wonderful foliage like this variegated one, for example, as well as the different colours of flowers that you can get. So it's a great way to add some colour to the plant collection too. So I'm going to run through these varieties that I've got, some of the others that you can get on the market, a complete care guide on how to look after them and help them thrive, as well as how to propagate them so you can multiply them for free if you've got them in your collection. And do let me know in the comments below if A, you've already got one, and some tips on how to care for them and possibly how you use it if you do decide to use it and not just have it for decorative purposes, but also if any have made your wish list, if any take your interest from the ones that we run through. So I'll be really interested to know your thoughts in the comments below. Now these aren't true geraniums, they're actually pelargoniums, but they're commonly referred to as scented geraniums. So there are loads of varieties and they grow all over the world, so the varieties that are available might differ from place to place. So I'd be interested to know if any of the varieties that you have available to you are different to the ones I've got here in the UK. Now these are perennial plants, so that just means that they will flower every year, usually between the late spring and early autumn. Now we're talking about keeping them indoors, so that should be fine year after year. You should be able to keep these plants happy, green and healthy, and then benefit from those flowers every year. So we'll go through the different varieties that I've got here, and then I'll show you a quick overview of some of the others that you could get, although I'm sure there's many others out there too that I won't be able to cover in this short video. So I'll start with this one, which is the rose scented geranium, and this one, as the name suggests, smells just like an actual rose. So whether you touch the leaves or brush past it, move it, you get that wonderful scent of roses. And this one, as I've already said, you can see it's got a very spread out, rather large growth habit, and I could possibly make this a little bit bushier if you maybe trimmed off the ends and propagated them, which we'll come to later in the video, and then that'll hopefully prompt the side shoots out. So this one is just growing up at the moment, so it could become a little bit unruly if it's not trimmed down. And this one has some flowers on the way as well, so it's got wonderful little sprays of pink to purple flowers, and they're all coming up at the top in little sort of bunches on each of the stems too, so not long until those come out. So this is the rose scented geranium. And here's the other one that I had just a moment ago. This one, as you can see, is much more compact, loads of leaves and stems going on in the pot. This one, as with the others, does need a bit of a tidy up from the garden centre. Some of the lower leaves have been damaged when they've been stacked in the trays, or possibly even from less light or even less aeration, so they've deteriorated. But the rest of the plant is really healthy and lots of new growth coming up on these stems too. This one is also different with its leaf shape as well, so these are smaller leaves but much fuller leaves, as opposed to being as pointed or as frilly as the rose one. So this one is the lemon scented geranium, and as the name suggests, again, it's just like you've cut a lemon, and it's really zesty and fresh and very clean smelling too. So if you like a clean smelling home and you like that zestiness of lemons, then this would be a good one to have in your collection. And this one doesn't yet have any flowers coming up that I can see, so I'll have a quick look online just to see what colour they will be when it starts to bloom. Now this is the next variety that we'll look at, and I've brought this one back for comparison purposes. So you'll see these ones are quite similar in terms of leaf shape and even size of plant, but this one is much darker in terms of colour and even has a more prominent white veining on the leaves. And while it is compact compared to the first one, you'll see it's not as compact as the lemon. There's a little bit more sort of open stems and leaves in there compared to this one. So this one is the cola scented geranium, and you might think that's odd that you can get a geranium that smells like the drink cola, but you can. So when you touch these leaves or brush past them, you get that quite sort of sweet, spicy smell from the leaves. Now this one hasn't got any flowers coming up either that I can see, so these must flower a little bit later in the year compared to the first one that was already flowering. So again, I'll double check online and see what colour these usually are when they flower. And here's the next variety. So this one is quite a bit different from the other ones we've seen so far, quite a bit bigger. It almost mixes some of the characteristics of the other ones, so it's bigger than the last two but not as big as the first one, and it is also quite compact, but maybe not as compact as the last two. So this one has a lot of stems and leaves going on in the pot, so a very bushy plant. Now this one is called the Concolor Lace, and often the name usually references the scent of the plant. However, in this case I think it references the leaves. So these leaves are quite a bit different than the last two, much more prominent lobes and a frilly outline, which I think is a reference to the lace, the frilliness of the leaves. So this one is described, or at least its scent is described on the label, as spicy and nutty. Now, after sort of testing some of the leaves, I would describe it as maybe pine mixed with nutmeg, so it's quite fresh but also mixing in some warm spice in there as well, if that makes sense. Although not nutmeg, because that is a separate variety on its own. So this one gives you that sort of nice, maybe almost festive smell. If you want something around the festive season, this would be a really good variety for that. And this one has flowers on the way as well. These ones look spent, so I'll deadhead those, but these ones have more even coming up on the way with these wonderful pink to red sprays of flowers. And here's the next variety, and as you'll see, this one is quite a bit smaller than the last one, although it does have very similar colour and shaped leaves with these very frilly type leaves there. But the growth habit, very similar to the second and third ones, very compact, lots of leaves and stems going on there in the pot. Now that could just be that it's a smaller plant and it could develop and spread out as it grows. As you can see, these bits are starting to grow off as it's getting bigger, but we'll see how it develops going forwards. So this one is the chocolate scented geranium, and this one again might seem odd that you can get a chocolate scented plant. In my opinion, I think it does have that element of that chocolate smell, but it's not as if you were smelling an actual chocolate bar in front of your nose. This one has a spicy element to it as well, so maybe if it was chocolate and clove or cinnamon, something like that in there too. Now this one looks like it is just about to flower, so it's got some on the way, although it does actually have some spent there, so I'll deadhead those, but it does have a lot more coming up on the way. So again, we'll see what colour flowers it has. They look like they're going to be maybe a pink or reddish colour like the last ones that we've seen. And here's the next variety, and as you'll see, this one is quite a bit different from the other ones in terms of growth habit, leaf shape and even leaf colour. So this one is the mint scented geranium, and as the name suggests, it smells like mint. I would say it maybe smells a bit harsher or fresher than a standard mint, so almost mentholy. It's very, very prominent, but still a nice scent if you like that very fresh minty scent. Now this is probably one that you wouldn't necessarily buy for the flowers, they're a bonus. This one is probably one that you'd buy for the foliage, because this has wonderful variegated foliage with that white cream outline on the leaves, but also the leaves themselves are very feathery. That feathery edge to the lobes as well give this a lot more detail than the other ones that we've looked at so far. Now this one isn't flowering at the moment, and hopefully they will come soon, but I'll double check online to see what colour the flowers are on this one. And here's the next one, and as you'll see, this one's quite a bit different from the others too. This one looks quite unruly almost, with these stems going off in different directions, but still quite a compact growth habit in the middle. So this one is the pine scented geranium, and this one, as the name suggests, smells just like pine, very fresh. It's a very strong scent as well. Now this one, as I said, it has some similarities to the others in terms of the leaf shape, very much like 2 and 3, or varieties 2 and 3 that we went through, as well as the growth habit too. Very similar, quite compact with this middle part of the plant, or main part of the plant, but you'll see that it's got these stems just shooting off with the flowers on in all different directions. So this could be part of its charm. If you like that very wild look, then something like you might see in a woodland or a cottage garden, then this is a great plant for that sort of aesthetic. But if you like a tidy plant, then this possibly isn't the one for you. But it is nice the way that the flowers are sort of almost showed off on these stems, these very long stems, very delicate flowers with white petals and pink to purple dots or detailing on them. So some of these are already spent, so I need to deadhead some of these, but there are lots more on the way. So hopefully we'll see lots more of these stems shooting off with lots of those wonderful flowers. So that's just a handful of the varieties that are available, and as you saw from that small selection, there are some similarities between the varieties, but also some quite significant differences. So I'm sure if you were to look out there and see what other plants are on the market, what other varieties are out there, you would find many others, not just different fragrances and flavours, but also very different in terms of their growth habit, their plant aesthetic, depending on what you're after. I'm sure you'll be able to find a variety that fits within your houseplant collection. So there are many other varieties, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but some of the others that you can get are black pepper, cedar, lavender, strawberry, peppermint, orange, apple, nutmeg, which I did mention earlier, cinnamon, pineapple, and again, that's not exhaustive, so there are many others. So go and see what you can find, and if you have found any others that are different to that, let me know in the comments below. So now we'll move on to plant care, and as I mentioned, we're focusing on keeping these indoors, so we'll focus on indoor plant care for these. We'll cover all of their different needs as well as propagation in just a moment. So soil or potting mix seems like a good place to start. So this is really simple. They like a really well draining potting mix, so that could be a soil or compost base with some perlite or grit mixed in, just to loosen the texture and make it really well draining, so the plant can take up the water that it needs, but any excess just drains off through the bottom of the pot, and it might maintain some moisture, but they don't like to sit in damp or waterlogged soil. So that leads nicely onto watering, and there are a few points here, one particularly relating to the variety that you've got and depending on your plant practices already. So as I said, they don't like to sit in damp or waterlogged soil, so they like that well draining soil mix. So when it comes to watering, let the top of the soil dry between waterings and water little and often as opposed to lots at a time. If you've got drainage holes in the pot, that's obviously always a good thing. Let them sit in the water for maybe 20 minutes to half an hour, take up what they need, and then get rid of the excess. Then you know they're not sitting in excess water and it's not going to be damp or waterlogged. That can lead to root rot or stem rot and obviously kill the plant off. But also, if you have a very compact variety where there's lots of leaves around the base of the plant, if there's damp soil, that could lead to fungal issues around the leaves, which has happened with a couple of mine, just from where they've been in the garden centre, which I think is partly due to being watered from the top as well. So if you've got compact varieties, maybe water from the bottom so you know it's going straight into the soil as opposed to on the top where it'll be sitting on the leaves. So just a few things to bear in mind with these. Little and often let the top dry out first between waterings and avoid it sitting in excess water. Now when it comes to lighting, these like a lot of light, and you'll generally find that with summer flowering plants, they like the summer, the longer, brighter days. So these are no exception, and when they're outdoors, they love the sun. But obviously we don't have that luxury indoors other than putting them near a window. But we've just got to be careful, as obviously sunlight through the window is magnified, the heat and so on. So it can obviously scorch plants if they're too close, depending on the variety. So with these, put them close to a window, but maybe not too close, where they're going to get enough good bright light throughout most of the day, and that should keep them happy. Obviously play it by ear. If you need to move it a bit closer or move it a bit further away, you'll see how your plants are getting on. But of course with that, monitor the watering levels and how often you need to water, because the warmer or more light it's getting, the more active it's going to be and the more water that it will need going forwards, but obviously not too much, so you're not obviously waterlogging the soil. Now when it comes to temperature and humidity, I've combined these as they really have no special requirements, particularly when growing these indoors. As with any houseplant, obviously avoid dry heat areas such as near radiators or drafty areas where you might have aircon or something like that. No plants will necessarily like those. If you're going to put them near a window, of course it's going to be very warm and generally dry warm or dry heat near windows, particularly when it's sunny, but these are summer plants, so they generally don't have a problem with that. Again, with the winter, they shouldn't have an issue with the temperatures. While they are not maybe suitable to go outside in the winter, if they're indoors, our home should be a suitable temperature for them anyway. So no issues really with temperature or humidity that you need to factor in with these plants. They're generally very easy care in that respect. And then when it comes to fertilizer, there aren't really any special requirements with these. These don't seem to need as much fertilizer as other foliage plants, so the general rule of thumb is less is more. So if you use a water-soluble fertilizer like I do, maybe factor it into the watering schedule every 4 or 5 waters, every month for example, or even reduce it down in terms of dilution, for example, and then that should give the plant what it needs. It would benefit more obviously when it's got lots of active growth and flowering, so the start to the middle of the season, but then when it starts to slow down, when the flowers are spent, reduce the fertilizer down, and also obviously over winter reduce it to a full stop as you would with most of your other houseplants. So now let's look at propagation and how we can multiply our scented geraniums for free, and I'll talk through it first quite briefly as there's a couple of points to mention with these, and then I'll do a demonstration. Now this is going to use methods that you already use with other houseplants, so it's really easy to propagate these, and they are quite readily propagatable plants, if that's even a word, or easy to propagate. So what we're going to do is take a stem cutting, just like you would with any houseplant stem cutting, take the stem cutting just below a leaf node, remove the leaf, and that's where the roots will generally develop. You want to remove any excess leaves, so there's maybe only 1 or 2, just so there's enough to keep it alive, but obviously not so it's actively transpiring and potentially burning out before it's developed roots and can take up its own water. So it's always good to use new growth, as I said, so use the end of a stem when taking a cutting from these. When it comes to the method, You can use water or soil, but it's best to use the soil method with these. So if you were to look online, you would see that the water method being used successfully, but it does take longer for them to root in water, and as we said before, they don't like too much water, so there's a higher risk of them going bad in the water. So at least with the soil method, you've probably got better chances than, or higher rate of success with the soil method than you would with a water method, and hopefully quicker too. So once you've taken your cut in, you've prepped it, you've taken off the leaves, then just put it in some well-draining potting mix so that that leaf node is covered, and then you'll put it in a spot with good light, not as bright as an established plant would have, but good light, and generally keep the temperature around it warm. Some people put them in propagators. If you've got the right sort of temperature and general humidity in your home, then it shouldn't really be an issue. Just keep an eye on the moisture levels in the soil so that it's not drying out completely, and it should be fine without a propagator. But if you do need to use a propagator, or if you're in a cold climate, for example, then they might benefit from that extra warmth and moisture retention. So then when it comes to the propagation, it's always good to water your plant shortly before taking the cutting, so about 30 minutes or so, and then select a healthy piece of stem or cutting material. You'll also want the soil, so I've got a little bit of soil in here mixed in with perlite mixed in for the extra drainage, and then I've also got some scissors, so you want sharp cutting utensils and clean cutting utensils such as secateurs, a knife or scissors. So I'm going to take this cutting in just a second, and I really should have a table for this so I'm not trying to balance everything and hold things while I'm trying to do the cutting as well. So I'm going to take this stem just here as the cutting, as this one looks like it's actually got two leaves that I can take off, so maybe two chances of getting roots. It's right near the top, so it's new growth, and once the leaves are off there'll be a couple of little leaves on there which should be enough to keep it going. It's also what looks like at the back of the plant, so it's not going to be missed too much. So I'm going to cut it just there, just below the leaf nodes that are above it, and that was a nice clean cut. So now I've got this little piece of stem, so I'm just going to pop this plant down, and then I'll be able to prepare the rest of this stem. So we've got these two big leaves which we don't need, so I'm going to take these off, just peel those back, or you could use a knife and take those off, but I'm just going to peel them back just like I would with most of the houseplant propagations if I was propagating the stem. And I might even take this little one off as well, as it's still got two tiny ones there, and you'll see it's a very tiny cutting. Now with these leaves, don't get rid of these, don't throw them out. I'll show you what you can do, or maybe not show you, but give you some ideas of what you can do with these once you've taken these off. One other benefit of taking this cutting from the plant as well, cutting the top of the stem off, lots of the plant hormones that prompt the direction of growth in the plant will be at the top of the plant main stem, so it'll be growing upwards. So if you cut those off, then it should prompt the side shoots to start growing and create a bushier plant. So if you want a fuller plant, that's an extra benefit of taking the propagations from the tops of the stems. So I'm going to take this little leaf off as well, and this is going to be a very, very small stem propagation. So that's all I've got left. And all I'm going to do is get my pot of soil back, make a hole in the soil, and then just make sure that those leaf nodes at the bottom are covered when it's in the soil. And then I'll give that some water, so I'm just going to pat that in. Not too firm, because it still needs to be loose enough so that the roots can develop and grow, and that it's still well draining. And there we have a potted up propagation. So I'll keep you updated in future videos of how that's doing, and I might take a few more from the other varieties, because now is the perfect time to do it during the summer when you've got all of those new shoots and the active growth on the tops of the stems. So then with your spare leaves, I will cover off what we can do with those in just a moment when we think about the uses of our scented geraniums. So then when it comes to using the plant, it's almost a bit of a super plant in that respect, in that it can be used for so many different things. So you can use it in the kitchen as a flavour, as a fragrance in toiletries and cosmetics, as well as around the home. And it's almost a zero waste plant, and I'll touch on that in just a second. So if you were using it in the kitchen as a flavour, you could potentially use it on salads like you would a herb to add some extra flavour. You could use it in cooking dishes in the same way, even use it to infuse things so you can enhance the flavours of certain things to then use in cooking and baking. So maybe in oils or in sugars and syrups, also in teas as well for the flavour, just like you would with other botanical elements in teas. Then if you were using these in cosmetics, you could use these in all sorts of things, again, just like you would as flavours, but as fragrances this time. So you could infuse bath oils, use them as sort of bath melts or bath bombs, those sorts of things. Add it to soaps, handmade soaps, depending on if you make them. And then again for home fragrance, in the same way you could make things like mists and waters, or you could dry them and put them in some sort of homemade potpourri, just as fresh plants, so you don't even need to cut them up or do anything with them. These were used many years ago, back in Victorian times I was reading when I was doing the research for the video. Put them in an entryway, and as people come and go from your home and brush past them, they get that wonderful scent from the plants. So that was something that they did in Victorian times, but it sounds like a really good idea if you want people to have a nice impression of your home. So no cutting or chopping or preparing needed, just put the plant in an entryway. And it is important to know I've only given a high level overview of the uses, so if you do decide to use them for anything, whether it be in the kitchen, for toiletries or around the home, just make sure that you do a bit of research first to make sure you are preparing and using them in the correct way. As with any ingredient, I think this goes for just about anything nowadays, it can cause irritation to some people, so if that is the case, obviously stop using it, stop ingesting it, or stop using it in toiletries or around the home just for your own safety, but I think that's just common sense. So there's just an example of the wide range of scented geraniums available and how you can potentially use them. If you've got any in your collection, let me know in the comments below any tips for caring for them, as well as any ways that you use them that might be different from what we've already covered. I'd love to see them, and you'll be helping out other viewers too. If you have found this video interesting, then consider subscribing, as I'll have new videos every week on plant related topics, and I'll link my previous video about edible houseplants, which also covers scented geraniums, at the end if you'd like to watch that next and find out what else in your houseplant collection could be edible. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll respond to everyone, and as always, thank you for watching. Grow your well-being.